So in this video, we're going to talk about normalization and its three different forms. I'm going to show you some examples of non-normalized tables, and then we're going to go ahead and take them and put them into the correct format. So what is normalization? Normalization is going to be sort of a convention within database design that we're going to use to make our data more concise and also to not repeat data. So we're going to try and categorize our data better. The idea is that we also don't want to repeat it. Continuing forward, so take a look here at this customers table. So this particular table is in violation of normalization form 1 because the name has both the first and last name inside of it, and the address has the actual street name, the city, and the state separated by commas. So with the normalization form 1, the idea is that we have a separate column for each piece of data that we have coming in. So we don't want to list things out within a column. We don't want to put two pieces of data in the same column. In order to fix this particular example here, let's copy this table and we'll say now customers, we want to add a first and a last name. So instead of just having a name, let's move this over. So copy this whole column. And this is just an example of how to make it normal. Obviously not going to be doing this in Excel. At some point we'll be using a different program. But I just want you to see the difference between what the right way is and what the wrong way is. Okay, there we go. That part. All right, so now this address, let's split that up into separate columns. And actually, since address, it appears that what we did before, address should be its own table. So then we would then split this into its own table. So we'd have address there, and we want to add a column here for the address ID. So this is going to have a one-to-one relationship, like we've seen before. All right, and so let's make this address have an ID. Copy that right there. Okay, there we go. So now we want to, for address, instead of it to just all be bundled into one column, let's separate it out to street. And we're going to say street, city, and state. There we go. And let's kind of separate out some of this information. That can stay there. Let's put that in the city column. And the state's going to be California, or what is that? New York. 1, 2, 3. Washington and California and San Jose. All right, so you pretty much get the idea of separating out this data. I really just want you to see kind of the end result of it. Okay, let's see if we can make this the right color here. Almost there. I should have just copied that. We'll go ahead and there we go. That's better. Get rid of that stuff. Okay, so there we go. Now we just need to put this address ID in here so that we can reference that correctly. And what you've been seeing is that the color is always red for these particular ones. That doesn't necessarily matter. I just did that so that you could see. So there we go. Now we've separated our customers table into customers and addresses. And we no longer have a non-normalized form. We have addresses split nicely into into street, city, and state. So that information is all separate. Customers has now taken the full name and separate it into the first name and the last name, and we've put address ID in here so that we can reference this address table. So that's the first normal form taken from the violation to complete part. Now let's take a look at the normalization form 2. So in this example, normalization form 1, we actually have to have everything in normalization form 1 before we can even get to normalization form 2. So you wouldn't have one that existed necessarily without the other. You would have to put everything within form 1 would have to pass, and then we'd have to get to form 2. So getting to form 2, all of this information is properly put into separate columns. We have a movies table with the title of the movie, the year, and the category. The problem then here is that this category portion is repeating pieces of information. So you notice here that Happy Gilmore is a comedy, and 21 Jump Street is also a comedy. Despicable Me is a family movie, and Despicable Me 2 is also a family movie. So we need to get rid of these duplicated values here. We need to make sure that if pieces of information are going to be repeated, that it is going to be a foreign key and not the actual value itself, because that can get... If we were to do that, then comedy would be unnecessarily repeated multiple times, and that takes up a lot more space in your database and can slow things down eventually. So let's separate out category here. I'm just going to copy that, and we'll make category its own table. Okay, actually, let's move it over here. So make category its own table. This will be the name of the category. And we also, remember, we need an ID for everything. We should just be able to copy. We actually should only have, looks like 3 genres here. Okay. And we can get rid of that. Okay. And let's name this categories. Okay, so we have an ID and a name. Now let's just go ahead and replace this category with category ID. And so comedy is 1, adventures 2, families 3, 1 and 3. There we go. So now, much more concise. We don't have to have the actual name listed within the category, and we can easily reference that category. So now the only thing that's repeated is then the ID, and that's much less space. It's much easier for your database to find that actual piece of information, and that's normalization form 2. So if anytime you see a particular column where information is repeated like that, you want to make sure to separate it out into a separate table and then keep track of those values separately. Okay, let's move on to normalization form 3. So normalization form 3, again, we have to pass both normalization form 1 and normalization form 2 in order to even make it to this point. It passes normalization form 1 and form 2. Each column has its own particular piece of information, and it is not repeated at any point in time. Just a side note, very rarely will you make it to normalization form 3 without violating form 2. If you'll take a look here, the publisher name inside of a book's publisher name more than likely will be repeated multiple times. In this example, so far it hasn't, but typically you won't really make it to normalization form 3. I just want to explain what it is. So looking at this example, we have the publisher name and the publisher rank within the books table. I think you can pretty much determine that these don't necessarily fit within books. It looks like we can separate them out. And the reason why this violates normalization form 3 is because publisher rank is dependent on this publisher name. So if for some reason this field got changed, we would also have to then change this field. So this is dependent on this field here. So that means that it violates this normalization form 3. And then what we need to do in order to fix it is separate out publisher, put it into a separate table, and then put the key to that table within the books. So starting to kind of develop a pattern here. We're separating things out and then creating a key for that particular piece of information so that we can access all of the information in that table with just one simple key. So then I'm going to copy these and we'll bring them down here. Whoops, I want it there, I want it here. And we also are going to want an ID for that. And let's change this to publisher ID. so we'll talk more about this, but talk more about other ways for like naming conventions for specific tables, and we'll dive deeper into how we name tables and things like that. For now, I just want to talk about normalization, just so you know that we always are we don't necessarily want to have the title, or sorry, we don't want to have the name of the table listed within our actual field names because it's redundant. Because the name of the table itself is going to be publishers, so we don't want to list publisher as well. We want it to be as short as possible. So then we'll have within publisher the name and the rank. And so now we just need to reference the particular publisher ID, and because we just put them in order, it just goes 1 through 4. And just for visual purposes, I make that red. Okay, so that's how we can go from turning something into something that violates the normalization form 3. Again, we rarely get to this point, but if you do, this is how you solve that problem. You just separate it out into another table, and you go ahead and create a reference to that table. Sorry, excuse me. I want to get in the habit of saying foreign key, so create a foreign key for that particular column within the reference. All right, so that does it for normalization. I'm going to continue working through database design and introducing some new concepts